Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Today we are going to talk about the case for genocide. We're going to talk about the International Court of Justice, the process, and a little bit of its history. It's important to put it in context and to understand where we are today. But first, this is Latina Literati. Let's get right into it. The International Court of Justice was established as one of the main organs of the United Nations, and it came into being in San Francisco at the Palace of Fine Arts in 1945. In June of 1945, the Charter of the United Nations is signed in San Francisco at the Palace of Fine Arts. International Court of Justice, the seat of the International Court of Justice is in the Peace Palace in The Hague, the Netherlands. It's the only one of the 6 major organs or institutions of the United Nations that is not in New York. It is in The Hague. And the first hearing, the first case that was heard, was in February of 1946. So right away it got to work. The first judge that presided over the court was José Gustavo Guerrero, a judge from El Salvador. And it's interesting because even though it's hearing its first case in 1946, the law that is being applied is the law of genocide that doesn't come into being until 1948. So these cases may be heard, but the outcome may take years. And so one of the requests of the current case before the court are provisional orders, and those can be issued immediately. They don't have to decide the whole case. They can say, look, stop what you're doing, stop the genocide right now, and we'll decide the merits of the case as long as it may take. So that's really what's being pushed for right now, to stop the genocide. So let's talk about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means what is the authority that's given to the court? What can they hear? So the International Court of Jurisdiction can hear cases of genocide brought by states. So it can't be just groups of people, it has to be recognized formal states. And so that's why the state of South Africa has brought the case against the state of Israel for genocide. So what happens? Both sides are given time to present their case, and I'm sure that you've seen snippets, if not the entire presentation of South Africa and Israel on this case. Incredibly moving. And so, again, the most important thing is that provisional orders are the first orders that can be issued in this process to try and stop the genocide. Both Israel and the United States are signatories to the 1948 Convention on Genocide, so they are both bound by the decision of the International Court of Justice. There is no enforcement mechanism, but there are definitely international pressures and political pressures, of course. Either we are going to be ruled by the rule of law, or we're going to be ruled by canon law, whoever has the biggest canon rules, right? And so the United Nations was set up to get beyond that. And it has heard many other cases of genocide. An example is Rwanda, Bosnia, and Guatemala, cases of genocide in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that have been murdered as part of a political decision in different countries. And so those decisions stand as what has been ruled in the past, and that's how you get to where we are today in terms of the International Court of Justice being the place where this case is going to be heard. That's how we get to why this is where this case was heard. South Africa, with its history of racism, of segregation, of colonial settlerism, has a moral high ground, has a very powerful position to bring such a case. It's not just any nation, it is a nation that has lived through an apartheid system, a system that treats people differently because of the way you look, of your identity, of your religion. And so this is a very, very powerful position, and that South Africa has come forward to take this case gives it an incredibly high moral value on the international community. And in fact, in the last few days, South Africa has sent a letter saying it is planning to present a case against the United States as well for arming and for financing the continued genocide in Gaza. So fascinating legal times in terms of the theories that are being put forth and what the International Court of Justice will do with them. As anti-apartheid icon and founding president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela said, "We are all part of one humanity." And if there is a principle that needs to be applied today, it is that we are all part of one humanity, and we cannot allow part of our humanity to simply be massacred. We need to stop the genocide. In other words, we are all one people. One of the key components, one of the central concepts of the case put forth by South Africa is that the October 7th attack is not an isolated moment in time. It was brought about by decades and decades of brutalism, colonial settlerism, apartheid, and incredibly violent treatment by the state of Israel towards all Palestinians. This is really important because the media would have you think everything started on October 7th, which by the way happens to be El Día de la Virgen, but that's an aside. Really important that we're talking about decades and decades and decades of people being killed, murdered by settlers, by the army, being tortured in camps. There are thousands and thousands of men, women, and children in concentration camps in the desert, the Negev desert, and others. And so this uprising, not that anyone is saying that it was okay to happen, but it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a great deal of violence for decades. So the systematic oppression of the Palestinian people for decades is what led to the terrible attack on October 7th. Really interesting because this is the first time in human history where a genocide is being live streamed on all social medias by both sides. So again and again, you are listening to Israeli officials quoted as giving intent. In other words, they're saying, we want to kill everyone in Gaza. We want to remove everyone in Gaza. We want to destroy Gaza. And then you have, soldiers in social media saying, there are no babies left. Ha, ha, ha. We have killed all the babies. So you have real people on the ground telling you what their intent is, their genocidal intent. And that is central. That is core to the case. And it's usually the hardest part to prove. But when you've got the actual group committing genocide telling you that, that makes it much easier. And so the legal experts are saying that this case is a very, very, very solid case against the state of Israel. What is being argued is that genocidal intent was communicated by the commanders to the soldiers, and never before have you had such guilt of genocidal intent waved in front of the cameras, showing off in front of the cameras as you laugh and blow up entire blocks, entire residential blocks in residential areas. So it's really clear. You're more than welcome. You can see it on any of the social media. It is incredibly, incredibly painful to watch all the suffering that is going on as we speak. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are the actual elements of genocide under the 1948 Convention of the United Nations, the Convention on Genocide? There are 3 elements. And I'm going to use a little bit of Latin because I think everybody should know a little bit of Latin. And the law, of course, is infused in Latin phrases, which we should learn a bit about. The first principle is actus reus, and that is Latin for you really did it. In other words, the perpetrator actually committed violence against civilians actually killed men, women, and children. And as of last count, it's about 25,000 men, women, and children that have been murdered. This does not include about 7,000 that are missing under the rubble. They have not been allowed to pull those bodies out. And it doesn't include the tens of thousands of people that have been maimed, wounded, and are in hospitals where they're not being allowed to give medical attention. In other words, there's a complete siege where neither water, nor electricity, nor food, nor medicine is being allowed in. So that is the actus reus. That is what is defined as the violence against civilians. Then, of course, you have the mens rea. Mens is the Latin for intent, genocidal intent. And how do you prove genocidal intent? We talked a little bit about it before. You've got all of the Israeli politicians saying, we want to kill all the Gazans. We want to rid Gaza of people. We want to destroy every single bunker. Every one of them is, accused and convicted of being against us. So we have to kill even the newborn babies. So you have so much evidence of this, using 2,000 bunker-busting bombs on residential neighborhoods, on refugee camps, on passages that the Israeli government themselves have said are safe passages. You have so much visual evidence. You have actual accounts on the ground. So this is huge, 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 and central to the case. And it is all on tape. The third element is causation. The perpetrator who actually perpetrated the violence, who had the genocidal intent, actually caused the damage. And that's where we get back to all the horrific armaments that are being shipped by the United States to Israel to continue this genocide. And so all of that is being used against civilians. So this is the case. These are the three elements. You judge for yourself. But I would really recommend that you listen to the arguments in the International Court of Justice so that you can really hear from those representing both sides what is being put forth. Very compelling evidence, really, really important moment in history for all the parties. Of course, the targeting of schools, the targeting of hospitals, the targeting of mosques, the targeting of churches. Some of the oldest churches in the Holy Land are in Gaza, and several are simply obliterated. So again, the excuse that, there may be someone hiding in there is just simply not good enough. It's not tenable. There's no evidence of that. We look to the International Court of Justice for the provisional orders that are needed to stop the genocide, and we hope that those will come quickly. And now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. There were actually a lot more books on genocide than I had expected, so I chose 4. I usually only recommend 3 books, but I actually recommend 4. The first is A Witness to Genocide, the ethnic cleansing of Bosnia. And again, just in terms of the context, you have different parts of Yugoslavia breaking off, and the Christians start to massacre the Muslims. And so you had tens of thousands of men, women, and children killed. That case was brought, and genocide was found. So that's an important case if you're interested in looking at some of the cases that have gone on. The second book is called What is Genocide? And again, it goes deeper into the elements and examples, and it has examples for Yugoslavia and Rwanda and different places in the world where genocide has been found to have been committed. Really interesting, because mostly it's the settler colonial powers of Europe will leave a place and say to one group, you're more valuable than your neighbor who is a different religion or a different ethnicity, and that usually leads to genocide. Really interesting. I really feel like there could be a case that the causation for all of this is settler colonialism. The third book is the Rwandan crises, exactly about the Rwandan situation where you had almost 1 million men, women, and children killed by machete. Also the brave people that tried to hide their neighbors. And so you had the Hutus thinking that the Tutsis were less than. And it traces the history, again, back to settler colonialism, where the colonial power said, you're more important and better than your neighbor. And that is what led to the political reasons and socioeconomic. I mean, they wanted the resources held by the other group. So you have to look at these acts in context, because there are usually reasons beyond simply just wanting to get rid of a group, right? It's usually land, resources. There's always something behind it, or geopolitical powers playing different groups against each other. The last book I'm going to recommend is The 100-Year War on Palestine by Rashidi Khalidi, an incredible writer, wonderful read. This you're really going to enjoy. It just gives you, again, the context of 100 years. How did we get to where we are today, and where do we need to go for peace in the future? So we hope that provisional orders will be issued soon, that the fighting, the genocide will stop, and that people can begin to bury their dead, to mourn those, and to rebuild their lives. And so in this new year, that is my deepest hope. As always, thank you so much for joining us on this joint journey. We love to have you along. Let us know what you're reading or what you'd like us to present in these videos. Always check your local bookseller and library for these books. They will probably be there. So again, thank you for joining us. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati. And as always, con mucho cariño, mucho amor, muchas gracias.